attendees are all flying in. We're about 50 people in.
Okay.
And then go find my. You can go ahead and talk.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody in this evening to our Tarrant County ERCOT Town Hall. And I really appreciate everybody being with us and being patient here. We had a little snafu that we've hopefully have gotten through, and we're ready to go ahead and get started. So again, I appreciate everyone being with us. I want to remind everybody in the audience that this event is about ERCOT and Winter Storm Uri exclusively. And we welcome your questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please type your questions in the chat box because we have over 500 people on this webinar tonight. Not all questions will get answered due to time restraints. You will receive a follow-up email after the webinar with Senator Hancock and Representative Capriglione's office contact information. And we ask that you please follow up with them on any unanswered question that you might have. First, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Senator Hancock. And Senator was first elected to the Texas Senate in 2012. Senator Kelly Hancock represents portions of Tarrant and Dallas counties in District 9. Before that, he served 3 terms in the Texas House of Representatives and 13 years on the Birdville ISD School Board. Senator Hancock helped lead Texas through 5 consecutive years of economic growth and record-breaking job creations as chairman of the Senate Business and Commerce Committee, which also deals heavily with electricity issues, so he knows tonight's topic inside and out. Last summer, he was appointed chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs and Border Security Committee. He also serves on the Transportation Committee, the Natural Resources and Economic Development Committee, the Budget Writing Finance Committee, and the Select Committee on Redistricting. So, our next speaker after Senator Hancock will be Representative Capriglione. Giovanni is now the owner and president of his own small business, Texas Adventure Capital LLC, which provides business services to various investment fund managers and business owners. His focus is investing in Texas-based small businesses. Giovanni was elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2012 and is serving his 5th term representing District 98, which encompasses all or part of Grapevine, Colleyville, Southlake, Keller, Westlake, North Fort Worth, and Haslett. He currently serves on the House Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Financial Services and the House Committee on Appropriations. So we will go ahead and turn it over to you, Senator Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I appreciate you being here and everybody being with us tonight, especially those dialing in. And Brad, thanks for taking your time. I know y'all have been very busy at ERCOT, as the PUC has been, and Geos for working with us on this. So I think we're going to have a good night and a lot going on. Of course, ever since Winter Storm Uri, there's been a lot of questions. And so this allows us to come and in our district and those that are dialing in to get several of those questions answered. But I think let's go back to the beginning. And as Gary pointed out, I was chair of Business and Commerce for 5 years. During that time, I can tell you that as soon as I was appointed chair, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that while we deal with a multitude of issues, 97% of the economy came through business and commerce, nothing was more important to our economy and to the growth of Texas than the electric market. It's very complicated. There was a lot to learn. And so from day one, I knew that I needed to invest a lot of time, energy, and effort into learning as much as I could about this market because it drives so much of our economy. And then when you take into account the population growth we're seeing and the demands there that we have even at the residential level, that this is a very, very important aspect of what we deal with legislatively. But at the same time, it's also very complicated and detailed, as I think that's why we have great experts at ERCOT and the PUC dealing with this. And as we built and as I learned about that during that period of time, never in my wildest imaginations did I ever think we'd deal with an event such as the Winter Storm Uri. We had 254 counties experience a freeze. Something literally you have to go back to the 1800s to ever even read about places like Laredo and areas down in our valley in southern part of the state that froze. All 254 counties. And so even though we knew we were going to have an event, and I think Brad, you'll attest to this, many that were involved, myself included, we began 4 days out trying to make sure that we had the capacity we needed to address some of the issues because we knew the storm was going to be difficult. We had no idea that Winter Storm Uri was going to have the impact that it had and such the catastrophe that it was. And we knew we were going to have to deal with it once we got that. So literally in the middle of the storm, we began working on an agenda of how are we going to hold the hearings, what issues we're going to address, what's the plethora of issues that are going to be evolving around having such a catastrophic event as we had with Winter Storm Uri. We put together that agenda. Soon as we had the opportunity during session there in February, we had 28 hours of hearings. And literally we focused on everything from the very beginning, from a wellhead into the compressor stations, into the pipelines, all the way down to transmission, literally all the way down to the household, looking at where did these issues occur and literally taking a look at it from top to bottom as we continue to take a look at the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT from top to bottom. What worked, what failed, and I can tell you we just had failures all across the board, but many things worked. And so we had to look at what worked, what didn't work, and through hours and hours of testimony, bringing people in and learning the facts there, much legislation was pulled together. I think Gio is going to go into that a little bit at the process and how that was people coming together. And there were a multitude of changes. We literally redid the entire system, the way we managed it, the way the board was established. And so we've seen wholesale changes. And I'm fortunate I have two of my former staff members are very involved in the Public Utility Commission, one in being a commissioner, the other one assisting in writing these rules. And those of us on the inside, Brad, the Public Utility Commission, incredibly busy since legislation passed and since we literally before we left the Capitol on addressing these issues and making sure that if we ever see an event like that again, that we're prepared and ready to go on it. And so a lot of work took place, a lot of hearings. We talked to everyone and did all we could legislatively to make sure that we tried to address everything we possibly could during those legislative sessions. And with the help of those at ERCOT and the PUC, I think we did a lot of work. And we're going to get to talk about that tonight. I'm excited about it. Brad's obviously in the middle of it as CEO of ERCOT. And Texas is unique. The reason that was such an important deal is we have our own grid. We're unique in that. And it gives us great advantage, economic advantage, compared to other states in the U.S. And so we're excited to take your questions tonight, excited to hear from Brad, get updates from him. And Gio, why don't you take the situation, just kind of what happened legislatively, and we'll let you take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for being on here tonight. I'm going to kind of pick this up where the Senator left off in terms of the process. You know, typically speaking, we'll work on legislation in the interim before we even go down to session. And so this was unique because in the middle of February, we just had the number one thing we had to focus on all of a sudden. And so Senator Hancock in the Senate had his hearings. We had hearings on the House side as well, along with things that people told us while this was all happening. And so we made substantive changes. I'm not going to go through all the bills that we did, but on the high level, probably the first thing we all started hearing about was on the governance, right? Who were the people running ERCOT? Who were the people running PUC? And of course, we started to find out that not all of them lived in Texas, and not all of them were necessarily as focused on this as they could have or should have been. So some of the changes we made, for instance, is in legislation was, hey, you have to be a Texas resident. You have to have no conflicts of interest. You have to have expertise in the subject matter. And I think just today's Zoom kind of shows the changes we made. I remember during the winter storm, it was about 18 hours before ERCOT even tweeted out an update on what was going on. And I think the ERCOT of today is completely different, communicating above and beyond, and that's what we want to see on the governance side. We also worked, as some people know, about what I would hear a lot of, and I know the Senator and others did, was people saying, well, I wish we'd have had some heads up, right, that we'd have known ahead of time that something might happen. So we passed legislation to require a lot of different ways for residents all over Texas to get kind of a heads up that there might be some power issues or some electricity issues upcoming. On one of the big factors, and I think Brad's going to talk about it, was on the supply chain, right? In order to get power to people's home, there's a lot of different factors. And if any of those break down, then the whole system can break down. And so what we saw, unfortunately, is that we had not done a great job defining critical infrastructure, what was important, what wasn't important. And unfortunately, in some cases, that meant that some of the important pieces of our grid got shut down just like everything else, right? So that's some of the legislation we worked on. And then finally, the last really kind of two big pieces that I'll talk about are related to with winterization and weatherization. Of course, it was very cold. The weather had a lot to do with the fact that this all happened. And I would say we were kind of prepared for the 20-year storm or the 50-year storm, but not the 100-year storm. So we're taking that to the next level. We, for the first time, we're doing a lot more compliance checks. We put actual fines and potential penalties and fees, and we put levels at which producers and generators have to be at. And I think Brad's going to talk about what the results of those inspections and compliance checks have been. The penalties are up to $1 million per day per infraction, just to give you a sense of how seriously this was taken. And then, of course, we heard about people having unexpected bills, right? Just signing up, whether it's for wholesale prices or for variable rates or whatever, and just getting socked with big bills. So from top to bottom, we listened to a lot of different testimony from different constituents. And I think we passed a significant number of bills, and tonight's purpose really is to make sure that everyone knows what got done and also to hear from others. So that, Commissioner, hand it off to you.
Okay. We want to thank both of you, Senator Hancock and Representative Perpiglione. Our next person that we're going to introduce is Brad Jones. And Brad joined ERCOT in May of 2021 as interim president and CEO. He has over 30 years of experience in the competitive electric industry, including leading two of the nation's largest electricity grids, establishing one of the first competitive electricity markets in the United States, and leading the development and expansion of electric generation facilities in Texas. So, Brad, we welcome you. Thank you for taking the time and being with us this evening. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pickus. I appreciate that. So I noticed one of the commenters already said, let's get to the question this time. We know what happened. But allow me just a few minutes just to kind of lay out some of the things that we've done. And really, before I get to there, let me give you a few more details about what happened. So I hope you'll hang with me, but we want to get to questions very quickly as well. So the storm itself, as has been said, was something like I had never seen in my lifetime. And in fact, my parents had never seen in their lifetime, and my grandparents had never seen in their lifetime. The last time we had a storm of this severity was 1895. Now, there's snow in Brownsville in 1895, and there was snow in Brownsville one other time in 2004. But this year was the only other time there's been snow on the ground in Brownsville. And I know that because I talked to the Brownsville folks today, and they guaranteed me that. So it shows you that from north to south, from east to west, this storm was different than what we've had before. As the senator said, every one of the counties was impacted. Every one of the counties was under freeze alert. Throughout the state, we had roughly 7 days, 5 to 7 days, depending on which region you count, but 5 to 7 days where we were below freezing that entire time. This event was much more severe than the one that in the electric industry we've always looked at, which was the 2011 cold weather event. It was much more severe. It was 10 degrees colder across every location. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, Brownsville, every location was 10 degrees colder in this storm than what had occurred then. And so what happened? During that week, really starting on that Monday morning, very early that Monday morning, we began losing significant amounts of generation. This is generation that wasn't coming offline because they wanted to. Something had broken or something had frozen. Something had failed and these generators had to come off. And in total, we lost 50,000 megawatts of generation. But let me give you a sense of that scale. Typically in the wintertime, we count on about 85,000 megawatts of capacity. We have more in the summer because in the winter, our peak load occurs when it's dark, and so there's no solar. We also have less wind capacity than we would normally expect across many of the other times of the year. And so we count on about 84,000 megawatts. So of that, 50,000 megawatts was unavailable to us. But let me give you one more dimension. 50,000 megawatts is the same amount of megawatts as the peak load in California on their hottest day in their hottest hour. We lost more than the entire state of California in broken machines. This wasn't an issue of not having enough capacity. Capacity was there. It just wasn't operating. And so that 50,000 megawatts puts an enormous strain on the system because the primary role of ERCOT is to balance generation and load. We don't own the generators. We don't serve the load directly, but we try to make sure those are in balance. And when you lose 50,000, ERCOT has to look around to find where are places that we can cut load. Now, the first place it's cut is in the large industrials. Those large industrials, they're watching the prices all the time. As they see the prices rise, they begin to drop off the system. So those facilities, refineries, plastic manufacturers, steel manufacturers, they're already off the system. They've already left. The next tranche that we look at is some customers, mainly large commercial customers, that we have purchased the right to turn them off in such an event. But after the refineries have gone and after these large commercial customers have gone, there was still a significant amount of shed that was necessary. And we then have to go to what I call our Alamo. Our Alamo, our last stand, is to reduce customer load by asking for load shed to occur. Rotating load shed is the plan. And every distribution company has a plan for how they would reduce their load if ERCOT asked them to do so. And ERCOT began asking that Monday morning. And they continued to ask. And normally these plans are set so that customers can be rotated and no one's off for more than an hour at a time. But that's not what happened here. Because ERCOT continued to ask for more and more. And soon we began to hear the distribution providers say, we're out. There's nothing left in the cupboard. We can't provide you anymore. And when this happens, customers are no longer out for an hour or less at a time. They're out for many hours because there's no one else to share this burden. And those customers are out for many hours and some of them for days at a time. And their homes begin to chill down to a level, to 30 and 40 degrees, to a level where it's unsafe to be in those homes. it also brings up another problem. Because when we ordered that load shed was to end, Wednesday, remember it started on Monday morning. Wednesday that week, we ordered to end load shed because the homes are so cold, the distribution providers can't bring them back quickly. They began to find out as they would turn a feeder back on that they would trip that feeder off, or they would damage transformers and have to replace them, because every home on that block now is trying to race its way back up to 68 degrees when they'd been down in the 30s and 40s. And as they discovered that, the distribution companies realized they had to go out to the feeders and turn 1 and 2 homes on at a time, let them warm up completely before moving to the next few homes. And because of that, it took so much longer to bring customers back. It was Friday before all customers were back. In addition to those 2 issues, in the center is an issue of communications, something that ERCOT has to get much better at. Because what happened in the storm is every part of the industry, whether it be generators or transmission or distribution providers or retail electric providers or municipal utilities or cooperatives, they all had their own message because everyone couldn't understand what was happening. We'd never seen something like this before. And so every part of the industry had their own message going out to customers. And because of that, we created a lot of customer confusion. And that customer confusion led to the problem of people staying in their homes when they really should evacuate, go to a warming center, or go to a neighbor's home that had power, or go down the street maybe to a family member that can take them in. People stayed in their homes because they expected the power to come back on, and it wasn't coming on. So in those problems is the root of the solution. Let me start with the cornerstone of the solution is in weatherizing our generation fleet. And I've got to say that with these 2 legislative members here on the phone, the legislature was in session, and they immediately were able to turn to this issue and honed in on the areas that we needed the greatest amount of change, the greatest amount of support, and gave us the tools that we needed to make that change. Following the legislative action and approval by the governor, we moved immediately into action, and the Public Utility Commission began drafting up the rules for how generators need to weatherize in the future. And not only did the legislature give them the ability to set those rules that contain significant penalties, $1 million, as was said earlier by the representative. Not only was that created, but also gave us, ERCOT, the ability to go out to these generators and to the transmission providers and to make sure that they'd done what they were supposed to have done. And if they didn't, we then would report them to the commission. Starting on December 2nd, we started that inspection process. Now, we waited till December 2nd because these generators were working hard to put their pieces together. They have supply chain issues just like all of us. They were trying to make sure that they got all the equipment in they needed and that they had the time to do these outages so they could change out this equipment and add the new blankets and build the structures they needed to do. And once they'd done that, we began the inspections on December 2nd. Now, for the period of the next 28 days, we inspected 85% of the lost megawatt hours in the state of Texas in Uri. Now, that 85% represented 304 generating units, as well as over 20 transmission facilities. And of that roughly 324 total inspections, only 3 of them did we end up saying failed to meet our expectations. The generators did a fantastic job of getting ready for this, and we're seeing that today. We just went through a cold weather spell just a few days ago. In that, we normally would have expected to see several units have freezing problems, issues with their generators. We had none, 0. And it's showing up because of the work they've done to get us ready today. In addition to the generation needing to weatherize, we also need to make sure that our transmission and distribution providers have adequate plans if we ever need to have load shed again. Adequate plans that customers can be rotated and don't have to be off for many hours at a time. That's going to take a lot of work, because at the same time that they're trying to ensure these plans are sufficient, they have more demands from many other companies, water facilities, natural gas facilities, that are saying we want to be on critical level service, and they're getting added as a critical service that will not be rotated, will not go into load shed. And we need that. That's important that those types of facilities, hospitals, fire stations, water facilities, and these natural gas facilities are not shut off in a storm. But as those come onto those plans, these utility companies have to struggle to make sure they have a sufficient plan to meet all of our needs. They're doing that work. They're making sure that is improved. And then on communication, real quick, and then we'll get to questions. On communications, it's very important that ERCOT takes a bigger role than we ever have. A role to really organize all of the industry, to make sure everyone is on the same page, using the same messages, talk to our customer ways, so the customers get a single message and not 4 or 5 messages that are conflicting. So we're doing that work to make sure that our industry is better coordinated. We're working with the state to make sure that the state gets the information they need and can get that information directly to consumers. So we're doing a lot of work to make sure that our communications is better, and I hope that you'll see that. Let me turn it over to questions, because that's really where I think we'll have the best opportunity to
Brad, thank you very much, and we are going to our questions. We've received a number of them, and I'll just start right here. Do we have enough power to ensure the lights will stay on if we see another Winter Storm Uri? Does Texas need more generators?
Well, there was 2 questions there. Let me start. Do we have enough power if we receive another type Uri event? The answer is yes. We have enough generation capacity in the state. And the key is making sure those generators stay on or not operating through one of these events. And that's what the weatherization is all about. The second part of your question is, do we have enough power? And really that goes more to a future question. We need more power because we have an extremely fast-growing state. The economy is great here in Texas. Businesses are coming here. More people are moving to Texas. So we have to continue to grow, and we have to make sure that we grow in the right ways, that we're attracting the right types of generation to meet the needs of our customers every day of the year.
Okay, next question.
But Gary, real quick on that before, because I think, because Brad, you're right. The right kind of power matters, because there is a big difference between dispatchable power and non-dispatchable power. Power that we can call on, flip a switch and the light comes on, versus waiting for the sun to come up in order to have light in the room. And so we have seen the state grow significantly in renewable power, solar and wind, but those are what we call non-dispatchable type power. It's not power you can call on, it's just power you get when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing. And so to meet our growth as we continue to grow as a state and we continue to grow as an economy, one of the things we're doing is restructuring some of our economics in order to make sure that we, as Brad pointed out, have the right kind of power, and we have sufficient power to address those peak hours where you're not going to have sun during peak hours this time of year specifically. And if you don't have enough wind, you've got to have the dispatchable available, because the variable between what you can count on and what you get is much less when you're talking about natural gas, coal, or nuclear than with some of the renewables we're talking about. So that's an important aspect that we're working on as well.
Okay.
And we do have enough power for today. I saw one of the questioners misunderstand your answer, Senator, and think that we didn't have enough. We do have enough power. What we're talking about is making sure that we have enough for the future. As our state grows, we have to make sure we're planning several years in advance to have what we need. And that's the discussion we're having today.
Right. These plants take years to build. They take years to get permitted. And so we can't plan. We have enough for today. What we got to plan is for our children and our children's children. And that's the market design that we're trying to make sure we cover.
Okay. with the auto industry moving toward battery electric vehicles, are lawmakers and grid operators making sure there is incremental capacity coming online over the next 5 to 10 years to support the increased charging demand?
Yes. I mean, that's a simple answer. We're making sure that our markets recognize the growth in our industry. We're projecting that growth forward, and our markets are investing appropriately. So the answer is yes.
It is a difficult scenario. It depends on the growth, right, Brad? I mean, if we had 10% of cars on the road today were electric and they want to plug their vehicles in at 7 o'clock at night when they get home, it brings challenges. I will tell you that as we move into that, recognizing that everybody comes home at the same time, plugs their cars in at the same time, it changes the dynamics of the market we're going to have to work with. And frankly, the capacity you're going to need by transitioning to electric vehicles is significantly higher, the higher percentage of people driving electric vehicles. So it will change our market structure, and we have to be prepared for it.
Okay.
That's correct.
Why should we be confident that the electric grid is in better shape than it was last February?
Well, I think part of that confidence is all of the work that's been done. That's where you should get the confidence from. Recognizing that so much has changed in the last year. First of all, ERCOT is operating the grid in a much more reliable way than it ever has before. We're bringing on more reserves in various situations. When we see cold fronts come through, bringing on more reserves and keeping those reserves on to make sure that if something unexpected happens, that we have those reserves available to us. In addition, as I said, we were weatherizing our fleet in a way that in the last week, we had great response out of the generators. We didn't see anyone that had difficulties due to the cold weather. And I saw one of the questions, that does include weatherizing of wind turbines as well. So it's everyone, all fleet types have been weatherized in accordance with the rules set by the Public Utility Commission. So that work, I think, should give you great confidence that we're managing this grid in a much more reliable way.
Okay, I hear a lot about Texas joining other states' electric grids. Why shouldn't we?
Why should we? That's let me answer that.
No, why shouldn't we?
Yes, and I'll let the senator and the representative jump in as where they might. But I would put it this way: if you live in the city of Fort Worth, you're probably certain to believe that the citizens of Fort Worth can better decide your rules than the citizens of, say, Dallas, right? If you're a Fort Worth resident, you don't want Dallas coming and setting your rules. That's the benefit that Texas gets by being a separate grid. It's a significant one, too. And I'll give you just a quick example. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and I know many of them, they're very good people, but I'll tell you this. They took until December to send us a list of recommendations for how to deal with the cold weather from Uri. We had that list from our legislature within months. We had the rules from the PUC within just a few months after that. We had most of the issues that the FERC identified already resolved by the time they identified them in late November, early December. So we were ready to move forward, and we did. That gave us a great jump on other regions. So that's another advantage. By having control within our state is very beneficial. The last thing I'd say is that many have asked, well, were we harmed somehow by not being connected during the storm? And I'll say in this specific storm, even the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission acknowledged that the power supplies moving from the Far East across towards Texas would have been consumed by those areas around Texas that were also in trouble before they made it into Texas. So in this particular storm, no, I don't think we are harmed by being separate at all.
And I guess if I would just say just two things. One, to kind of follow up. One, in terms of the speed, like you said, in order to be able to make the changes that we want, having been if we were part of a federal regulated system, we'd probably still be asking for permission to do some of the things that we've already implemented and in place for this winter. Second thing, I've looked at other states and looked at their grids. I would say they're in terrible shape. I mean, if you go and you look, for instance, at PG&E or some of these other places out that you want to be connected to, I'm not sure being connected to a much larger, bigger grid would actually have less chance of causing a problem. So I think the right way is for us to be able to work on the grid, have it local, and make whatever changes we can as quickly as possible.
And I will tell you that's not a partisan issue, by the way. I mean, this isn't for those that understand the market and the uniqueness that Texas has. This is not a partisan issue.
Well, I know about the second day of that, I'd have taken electricity from Rhode Island. Okay. So anyway, okay, we'll move on. During Winter Storm Uri, were there planned generator outages? If so, how has the policy changed to ensure all generators are online when we need them?
So the technical answer is yes. There were some very small amount of planned generation outages, but just so that everyone knows, there are some generators in our fleet in Texas that shut off in the fall, and they stay off all year long until it comes back to the summer. They only operate in the summer. So technically, yes, there were some planned outages. Most of them were that type of unit, but for the most part, the vast majority of that 50,000 was because of forced outages. These units did not have the opportunity to run.
Okay. How has the makeup of energy producers changed since February 2021? And are we relying more on wind and solar? And if so, could that be a problem?
So since the winter storm, the greatest change in our fleet in Texas is really an extraordinary change. In a single year, we went from roughly about 1,500 megawatts of solar generation across winter to 3,000 megawatts before the summer, to 9,000 megawatts after the summer. We currently think we're somewhere more than 10,000 megawatts today. We expect to be more than 12,000 this summer. We expect the next year to be close to 20,000 megawatts of solar. The solar is coming into our state in a great way. And I'm not concerned about solar coming in. I just want to make sure that we also have the technologies we need to back them up, because we know every single night they're going to stop running. And they're going to stop running over a 2-hour period. So although I'm very pro-solar and pro-wind, I'm also pro having the generation and the other resources necessary to back them up.
Yeah, and we have. I mean, we lead the nation in wind generation, right? And like today, what do we have, Brad? 20,000 megawatts of wind this evening,
yes,
I think is what.
Yeah, actually more than that. We're close to 35,000 now. Senator.
Which is phenomenal, because our demand's probably 55,000 megawatts right now. I'm guessing somewhere in there. But our peak time on demand is early in the morning when everybody's getting ready for work. So roughly between 7 and 8. The peak demand is in the evening, where everybody's, they're getting home from work and they're cooking dinner. So those are where we have so much strain on the system. And during this time of year, particularly with daylight savings times, you really get no assistance from the sun, even though where we've seen significant, tens of thousands of growth in solar. You don't get assistance during those peak times between at 7 and 7. What you get is about 10 to 3:30, Brad. Am I right?
Yes.
And so during those times, you do get that generation. So again, what we're talking about, what we're trying to do in Texas, is make sure that we have a good balanced portfolio, that we have the inexpensive and clean renewables with wind and solar, but we have that foundational base load that gives us what I say again, the dispatchable, where we can flip a switch or we can call on it and it's going to come, generation ample. And what we've got to look at is we have not had significant growth in any thermal generation in the last 10 years. And so it's balancing our portfolio and meeting the demands of economic and the growth of our people. People are going to keep moving to Texas. It's a great place to live. And economically, because of our grid, it's going to continue to be a great place to thrive economically.
Thank you. Okay, the rolling outages seem to be ineffective. I had friends who never lost power while I was without power for days. Why wasn't there a better plan to handle that, and how have things changed to ensure that doesn't happen in the future? I think we're talking blackouts, which
Yes.
are resistant, basically.
So the answer to that question really has to do with this other issue about critical service. So for hospitals, fire stations, police stations, water facilities, natural gas producing facilities, they're all on these critical networks, meaning that they cannot be shut off. Let me give you an example. Encore, which is the utility that covers most of Dallas and Fort Worth and out parts west, if I recall their numbers right, they said roughly about 60% of customers are on critical circuits. Those critical circuits cannot be rotated, which means that 40% of the customers are off and have to share all of this burden. Now, what Encore and other utilities are looking at is how can they begin to break apart some of that 60%? We know that if there's a feeder that has a hospital on it, it may also have 100 homes. And so if they can separate out that hospital from those 100 homes, those other 100 homes can help to share in one of these burdens through a rotating load shed. But what happened in this event, of course, was that 40% had to share all of that burden. And you may have seen people that were across the street even that had power, and they were on a separate feeder than you were. And that's why there's this sense that there's this differential level of treatment. It's because we haven't sectionalized our system well enough to make sure that there's a larger group of customers that can share in these load sheds. I do know that these utility companies are working on that issue today.
Okay. How are we holding the correct people accountable for the failures that happened during Winter Storm Uri? I think they all left.
Right. Well, he did. Let me start with the companies. The electric companies, the generation companies that failed during the storm, they all reported multi-billion-dollar losses. So financially, they were held responsible. And many of those were held responsible by their boards of directors. And I know some companies have gone bankrupt. And those companies, are continuing to struggle because their generation failed. They didn't meet the needs of either their customers or the state of Texas. And they faced penalties associated with that, financial penalties. But stepping away from the finances in the market, the CEO that I came in to replace was fired. I know that all of the public utility commissioners resigned. There is accountability. And part of that accountability is me being here talking to each of you. That's why I've also traveled the state, speaking to many groups across the entire state, north to south, east to west. I've been across the state many times, and it's because I want to be accountable to you. And that's the accountability that we have had in the state.
And Gary, one of the things we did is in our many hours of committee hearings, one of the things that disturbed me during that is the previous board experienced some conflict of interest. They were basically from the industry and had to determine at certain points, do I do what's best for ERCOT or, where I'm getting a paycheck? And so that is why during session, working with the House, working with the governor's office, we literally blew up ERCOT to the point. In fact, I saw an article that said that the ERCOT board resigned because, insurance lawsuits. No, that's not why they resigned. They resigned because legislatively we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have all new board members. They're going to meet a certain criteria. They're going to be able to make tough decisions on the spur of a moment. And so we did wholesale changes to the board that is governing over that. And they're in the process now, deeply in the process of establishing new bylaws and new rules and the way that they're managing. And I want to give Brad a lot of credit. He didn't talk about it much. The management style and making sure that we have adequate backup resources available on each and every day based on the risk that we're going to experience that day has changed dramatically. And he's done a great job of giving folks like the governor comfort of saying, we're going to be fine. It's because of a change in management style, and the change in management style we completely changed ERCOT this session in Senate Bill 2.
Okay. Can you expand a little bit and talk about winterization and weatherization, and how do power plants in other parts of the country operate without this disruption during winter storms like we've had?
Yes, so winterization, weatherization, they are the same thing. And all it means is protecting various sensitive equipment that might otherwise freeze and would cause the power plant to malfunction, to go offline. And it's simple things like thermal blankets, more insulation, building structures around some facilities to protect it from wind chill, running heating lines, what we call heat tracing along certain pipes to keep the water, the fluids flowing in them. It's simple things like that. But let me answer the second part of the question, which is how do other people do it? They prepare differently than we do. But let me give you an example. During the storm, I was sitting on my couch watching. Remember, I was still retired then, and I was watching on TV a fire in San Antonio, and the fire was raging through this apartment complex. And they asked the fire chief, who was standing there next to one of the reporters, why he wasn't doing more to fight the fire. And he said, because our fire hydrants are frozen. Well, I got to thinking, well, how is it that they don't have freezing fire hydrants up north? So I checked, and the difference is they build their fire hydrants 30 feet underground. We build them 10 feet underground. They also, their fire hydrant doesn't have any water running to it. The valve is actually 30 feet below. And so it's a dry fire hydrant. When they turn the valve, the water rises to the hydrant and then they use it. Our water goes all the way to the hydrant, so it froze up. The reason why I use this is just an example. Is two things. Our roads are built different here. The fire hydrants are put in differently here. Our power plants are put in different here. And it's because we have to be ready for the hot weather. And because if we build them 30 feet underground, it's going to cost a lot more for us to do that. So we do it because we don't expect a 1 in 100-year storm all the time. And there's some economies associated with how we do everything in the state. We recognize now that we've had this type of storm, and we're getting ready to make sure, or we already have made sure, I'll tell you, that we are ready, we're weatherized, we can withstand these types of temperatures.
Okay. Why were gas producers who lost power not considered critical infrastructure, and how can we ensure they do not lose power again?
So the gas producers always had the capability to sign up as a critical service, and they were identified as something that was a service that was eligible to them. But not all of the gas developers knew that that was eligible. And so what we've done this time is to make sure the Railroad Commission has ordered these gas suppliers to request critical level service if they're critical to generation. So they've ordered them to do so that they won't be turned off in a load shed event in the future.
Okay. Multiple electric companies filed for bankruptcy after Winter Storm Uri. What has changed to ensure more companies do not fail and Texans continue to receive competitive rates? We heard some horror stories on some of the rates that were charged to customers, residential customers, and to some of these large electric companies for the gas.
So I'll start, and then I'd like the senator to jump in on some of the legislation. You can do a much better job than I can, Senator. But let me start with one of the areas that got a lot of criticism was there were some retail electric providers that were selling services in the market, and the services were extremely low priced. Were roughly 6 and 7 cents, just so well below where the rest of the market was in terms of retail prices. But the reason why they were so low was because they pushed a lot of the risk to the customer. Now, most customers that signed up with them were understood the trade-off, understood that they were getting a low price because they accepted more risk, but not everyone did. And so the PUC, the Public Utility Commission, recognized that there was a problem where customers could be misled. They may not have understood what contracts they were getting into, what type of risks they were taking on. And they decided that no longer can those types of variable contracts be sold to residential customers. They can still be sold to businesses because they expect businesses know what they're getting into, but they can't be sold to customers. Now, just to be clear, we have roughly 9 million customers in the state of Texas, total meters of customers. And roughly, I think about 60,000 customers were on those types of programs. So a very small amount were on those variable plans. Senator?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pointed out when we did our committee hearings, what we found out is, yeah, those are the stories that the newspapers wrote about. The reality is 98% of customers were on a fixed rate plan and saw no change in that. But during the storm, I got a call from the governor and said, hey, there's going to be a huge cost to this. What are we going to do? And the reason there was a huge cost is because supply and demand impacted the market. And natural gas, for example, went from $3 at the start of Uri to during Uri. In those 5 days, we saw gas across the state range from $200 to $400, and it's an international market. So it was based on the ship channel because Pennsylvania is looking for it. So supply demand. So we saw huge numbers. Roughly the week was about a $48 billion week. Fortunately, 98% of consumers fixed rate plan. That's why you saw. That's what Brad pointed out. Most of your companies in this electric company had huge losses. What we did as a state is we provided a backing and a securitization that allows these costs to be spread out at a much lower interest rate that saves consumers money. In your co-ops, we did it in various areas and allowed access to it so that if you wanted to handle this on your own, you weren't in this pool. But if you wanted to utilize this securitization, this money loan, you could be a part of it, and you shared the risk, which lowered the rates and spread out the cost and allowed really people to survive. It allowed many companies to survive. Without the legislation we passed, you would have had significantly more bankruptcies. Wouldn't you agree, Brad?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, than what we had. And so it was because we were looking ahead, and while the storm was raging, and I'm, actually in Austin, my home here is without electricity. I'm with my daughter who's expecting any day, literally. That's why we were there. I'm on the phone with people from California to New York, some of the best financial minds in the country, coming up with, all right, what are we going to do? Because we knew that soon as the legislation and soon as we got these hearings going, we needed to have a plan to address this so that we didn't have an economic collapse related to Uri, because we knew the economics were there. The cost of Uri was tremendous. And so we began immediately putting together packages. And so we ended up passing 3 different pieces of legislation addressing that really saved our economy and helped spread out a lot of those costs so that it cushioned the blow of Uri, if that's in a financial sense.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, we've talked about some immediate changes that ERCOT has made. So what's next after these immediate fixes, and how are you planning to improve for the future?
So with regard to the winter, one of the improvements that we're putting in place is requiring some generators to have on-site fuels. So fuel tanks at the facilities and backup fuel sources so that in case the natural gas system is limited, those units can continue to operate. As many of you know, about 7,000 megawatts of that 50,000 that I mentioned earlier, 7,000 of those went offline due to gas limitations. So this would do a great deal of improvement to making sure that 7,000 megawatts is still available to ERCOT. That's one. But any of the steps we're focused on is long-term improvements, making sure that we have the right types of resources available to balance wind and solar, and that includes batteries, that includes quick-moving loads that can help us, and it also includes fast-moving generation. So all resource types that can fill this need for us, we're developing products so that they can stay in the market and are both attracted to the market as well as retained by the market. We don't lose those generators, and we bring more in. So as we said, our market's growing. You layer on top of that transportation, electrification of transportation, and we're going to see significant growth. And really, roughly about an 8 to 10 year period, we're going to see a lot of growth in this market. So we have to be ready for that. So a lot of what we're doing is looking forward to the future. We have to do that far enough ahead because we need time to build, for developers to build. We need time to build transmission, need time to build generation, and that's a part of the work is planning our future.
Commissioner, do you mind if I just jump in?
Go ahead.
I've just seen a few questions, all kind of similar. So I was wondering, Brad, you could address this. We talked about it a little bit before, but people are wondering one of the questions directly is what work is being done to provide valuable information to consumers in advance and in the event of another similar type of storm, right? Again, a lot of people just felt like they didn't have enough notice. I know at the beginning of this summer, I guess we kind of did a test of that, but maybe if you could talk a little bit about how ERCOT might be able to tell people what's going on.
And thank you, Representative. That is part of the failure of communication that occurred back during the storm. Getting far enough ahead of the storm to make sure the customers can anticipate what might be happening, can prepare for it, as I said, maybe move to a neighbor or a family member that they can take shelter in or to any of those kinds of things. Even, bringing water into the home and adding a few extra blankets and those kinds of things. Getting that message out to make sure that customers are better informed of what's happening and how long it will take is a key part of our mission. One of the things we've done is now we are part of the State Operations Center. The Texas Department of Emergency Management runs a State Operations Center, and they do that for the purposes of when hurricanes come in or across the state or anything of that nature. And when they set up the State Operations Center, they have people from all different parts of the state that are involved in communicating and making sure that problems are resolved. And so today, when the State Operations Center opens, when it reestablishes itself in advance of, say, a cold weather front that we see coming, and we're able to operate that center, when that happens, we will have the Public Utility Commission sitting right next to ERCOT, sitting right next to the Railroad Commission, sitting right next to the Texas Department of Transportation. All of those members communicating one to another to make sure that we resolve problems quickly and we communicate to all the citizens of Texas what's going on. In addition, the legislature gave us another tool, which is in process right now. It hasn't been put into effect, but it's in process now. And that tool is to allow the state to send out messages like the Amber Alert system to indicate to folks that the weather is getting really cold and there's a concern going forward, and to prepare for that cold weather, or, you know, as they do for hurricanes and other things today. So there's so many new resources and new tools that are available to us. I expect it will communicate to all residents much better than we've done in the past.
Brad, I want to thank you so much for being with us. You're new to this, obviously, not new to the industry, but you know, you came in to take a really, really big job with a gigantic responsibility. And I can't tell you how much that I appreciate the work that you put in. And Kelly and Gio, thank you both. We've reached our time limit, and I want to thank everyone that got on to our Tarrant County ERCOT Town Hall. And again, you will be receiving an email if you got on, probably tomorrow, and it'll give you information on who to contact, either Senator Hancock or Representative Capriglione, and you can give them a call if you have further questions. So again, thank everyone, and everybody have a good evening. So
thank you, Gary. Check out the ERCOT website too. Great information there.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.